And I'm Connie, that atheist lady. And tonight we have Nicholas Hollan with the representative for the 31st district in Ohio. And he is running as an open atheist candidate, which is something that is just unheard of here in America. We're like, you're doing what? So we're super super excited to have him here and talk about his campaign platform, how he came to be an atheist and all that jazz. So, Nicholas, how long have you been an atheist?
Hi. Well, thanks for having me on and giving me this opportunity. Uh, probably it was a process to get to where I am now. I think I was an atheist longer than I admitted to myself that I was because I was afraid to take that leap. I was afraid to stick my feet in those waters and jump in. Probably, if I'm being honest with myself, 7, 8 years probably that I've been an atheist, but only in the last 3 to 4 have I taken that step and no longer considered myself agnostic and dove in the water. And I come to find out the water is just fine and more people ought to jump in.
Awesome. It's not as cold as you thought it'd be.
It's not. It's not. There's good company.
Awesome.
And with atheism, you pretty much have a stigmatized word where everybody just sees it as something so bad. But now, recently, we're able to see more progression towards secular views and things like that. Society has evolved. We talked about it last week on our episode about morality. It's something that evolves, something that people realize, okay, these things are bad, let's figure out how to fix it, and it doesn't have to involve one belief because so many beliefs are out there. You're running against other people who are using their beliefs basically as flagstaffs, aren't you? I mean, you have other people out there saying they're Christians, and what is it like with the atmosphere of other politicians in the race?
Sure. Well, it's unique. I think this is going to be a primary for the Democratic Party's endorsement in the general election. So the other candidates in this race, I know most of them, they're all good people, but everyone's trying to build name recognition, letting people, the voters, know who they are, what they're all about, and hopefully show voters what everyone brings to the table. So yeah, there are some people who use faith as I don't know, a defining characteristic of who they are and how. Honestly, I see that more here in Cincinnati from the Republicans in the House than I do Democrats. But certainly, there certainly goes both ways.
Makes sense.
Yeah, because the general perception of society is that if you're a Christian,
Well, you're breaking up a bit, Connie.
system, so you will, am I?
Yeah.
What about now?
No, but what she's saying is the society basically views it. East. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm
All
here.
right,
Can
there
you
you
hear
go.
me?
You sound much better now.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead again.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so society as a whole generally views Christians as, morally sound and to have a good value system. So if somebody says, "Oh, I'm a Christian man," that's supposed to be a positive thing, and it makes a lot of people go, "Oh yeah, we want to vote for him because
He
or
holds
her."
certain values.
Yeah, his values obviously align with mine because I am also Christian. But
Mm-hmm.
something that a lot of them fail to realize is that there are so many different denominations of Christianity
Sure.
that
Sure.
chances are that person's values don't actually align with theirs if they dig deeper into it. So,
Well, that was one thing about the GOP debate. All those candidates in the last 30 minutes there, that last question really just blew my mind, the fact that it was even involved in a presidential debate. They asked them what he, I think he was saying like, did God ever talk to any of you or something like that? And they were just like, God speaks to me every day through scripture. And all of them kind of fed off of each other because they had to have known that if they were to speak their faith independently, they would have clashed insanely, and then they would have been able to, not say who's the better believer, but they basically fed off each other, and I found that absolutely amazing that Fox News added that to a presidential debate in politics, because separation of church and state obviously not being promoted in that atmosphere, which is ridiculous.
No, that's absolutely true. And what that speaks to, from a inside baseball perspective here, is candidates who are trying to play to their base in a primary to get the vote out. In any race, when there's a primary, the only people who care about a primary are those people who are super motivated and passionate about A, an issue, or B, politics in general. So in a primary, you're trying to tailor that message specifically to that small demographic of people who based on voting records, are most likely to vote in that election, in a primary. So it doesn't surprise me that candidates are trying to out-Christian each other, because the Christian right is a big voting bloc, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think this speaks to a bigger issue in American politics, and it's gerrymandered districts. It's districts where whichever party wins the primary for that party will win the general election because of how the districts are drawn.
Right.
And so when you have districts that are so gerrymandered, you have candidates who can't play to the middle. They can't move to moderate voters, because if they do, they'll lose their base in those primary elections, ergo not be reelected. So to me, the biggest issue facing good government in this country are these terrible, terrible districts that keep the incumbent in power, provided that incumbent can continue winning primaries. And you see on the Republican side, the Tea Party movement fill this void. If a candidate isn't conservative enough, they won't get the Tea Party vote, and those individuals will then turn their support to somebody who promises to be even more extreme. And when you have that kind of setup, it inherently, individuals in the State House, in Congress, have no incentive to work together. They have no incentive to compromise, because if they do, they'll be seen as betraying their core beliefs to that demographic that votes in primaries, and they won't get reelected. Inherently, this is a huge problem that we have to address.
Yeah, and since we're on the topic
definitely.
of problems that we must address, how do you feel about religious freedoms? Like, do you feel that each religion should have their freedom to believe in their own perspective, or do you believe that we should be forcing our beliefs, as atheists especially? We should be telling people, hey, you have to not believe in anything. A lot of these Christian right, they're pushing their Christianity onto people. They're saying you have to follow our beliefs, but we don't have to care about your beliefs. That's what they're doing. So I want to know if you're the opposite of that, which obviously would most likely be the case.
Sure. Well, yeah. To answer your question directly, absolutely. As long as those individual beliefs don't infringe upon the secular rights of other citizens, you're welcome to believe anything you want, especially if that belief system makes you a better person, however you choose to define better.
Right.
But again, it can't infringe upon the rights of your secular fellow citizens. And let me give you a prime example here of something we've just encountered. One of the biggest hot-button issues in politics today is Planned Parenthood, is whether or not a woman has a right to choose. The Supreme Court decided this back in the 70s. And for the record, that Supreme Court that made that decision was a majority Republican-appointed Supreme Court who voted this way because they realized that right, exactly. But that legally, there was no reason to restrict a woman's access to her own reproductive health care. Fast forward 40 years, we're still having this argument. We're still having this debate. And it's because conservative Christians have realized this is a flashpoint that they can rally up the masses, work everybody into a lather, and get them out to vote. So again, this is an issue of using a religious belief system that truly cannot affect the outcome here because the Supreme Court ruled on it. Abortion is legal, but trying to get people engaged and trying to get them to turn out and vote for conservative candidates who can move the needle on other conservative issues. So specifically, just, maybe 3 weeks ago, maybe a month ago, there was a protest right after those videos came out that were highly documented and edited about Planned Parenthood. there was a outpouring of anger, and people had their pitchforks and torches out, and they were going to our local Planned Parenthood here in Cincinnati to protest. So I got a phone call from a friend of mine who works for Planned Parenthood, and she asked us being supporters, to come out and stand in silent solidarity with Planned Parenthood. And so we did. We showed up with our pink T-shirts on, we held signs, and we simply stood there. On the other side of the fence, well, it was awesome in that we were showing that people care. You know, that this isn't just a one-sided dominated issue. But you wouldn't know it from the people that were there. There were probably 300-ish protesters outside, waving banners, waving religious icons. You know, I saw the Virgin Mary, I can't say how many times, standing there staring back at me, as though I'm terrible. And that's all well and good. That's fine. People are allowed to protest, so be it. And I didn't really think much of it. I really thought this was an opportunity for these people to feel good about themselves, to slap each other on the back and say, we did a good thing today.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Until another state representative named Tom Brinkman, who's a conservative from the east side of our city, stood up to the podium. And he gave a speech where I counted 4 different times he invoked his personal religious beliefs on why he was putting forth legislation in the Ohio General Assembly to outlaw abortion.
That's crazy.
He couldn't see the line separating church and state because it was obscured by all these protesters. He blew right past it without giving it a second thought.
Yeah.
And
they don't think about it.
There's a problem.
No, they don't think about it. And on the vein of the whole separation of church and state thing, we have a awesome question from Robert, who is watching right now. He's over in the chat, actually. He's eager to hear your answer to this one about how ministers get to are excluded from the state income tax value for their homes or cash paid to them for a home, and that some ministers have, millions of dollars of non-tax income over time from these home exchanges and things of that nature. And so what would you do?
Now it's because they're ministers, though, that they're not.
Yeah, it's
they're
because
not.
they're ministers.
Yeah, so they're getting basically free housing. That's the case.
Well,
right. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's housing paid for by the church that doesn't count as income, as I understand it. And I'm not a tax expert, but as I understand it, they still pay into Social Security, Medicare, but they don't have to pay income tax, for example, a federal or state. Inherently, that's a problem. We're talking about a nonprofit who should be providing a service to the populace, whatever that service is. I have grave concerns about this, and I was delighted to see just maybe 2 weeks ago, John Oliver had a segment on Last Week Tonight.
Televangelist.
Specifically about, I think he started a church called Our Lady of
Perpetual Exemption.
Yeah.
Genius.
And it's funny because it's so outlandish that this is even real.
Yeah.
If the NFL is a nonprofit, clearly there's a problem here. I would contend, when it comes to tax law, that any obligation that a citizen has to hire a professional to help them fulfill that state obligation is probably too complicated. The tax code overall is probably too complicated. And there are far too many loopholes for wealthy individuals, for religious-based, faith-based organizations to get tax breaks, to get loopholes, to not have to pay their fair share. Unquestionably, this has to be reviewed. These loopholes have to be closed so that we can generate funds, tax money, to provide basic services. Throughout Ohio, municipalities are struggling to be able to provide basic city services. Having these tax breaks, to me, inhibit that ability. But you know what? Let me take this a step farther, if you don't mind. Cincinnati. I don't know how much you two know about the Queen City, where I live, but we have a huge Catholic population here. I was looking up numbers before this meeting, and In Hamilton County, 25.6% identify as Catholic. That's a big population. Roughly 23%, I think, identify as Protestant. But I'm particularly interested in talking about the minister connection that the viewer mentioned in his question. Catholic churches, Catholic schools are able to classify essentially any employee who works at that institution as a minister, even if they're not what we typically associate a minister being. Anyone who works there, if they administer the faith in some way, shape, or form, are classified as ministers. And when that happens, they no longer are obligated to comply. The organization isn't obligated to comply with federal laws protecting workers' rights. So, in fact, we have an organization, the Archdiocese, who can fire any employee because they're classified as ministers simply for any reason or no reason at all.
And you're talking about teachers in Catholic schools even.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. There was a high-profile case here in Cincinnati where a computer teacher, computers, we're not talking about somebody who is teaching the sacrament, we're talking about computers. She went to her principal at her school, and she was actually at St. Lawrence School. And to make this in perspective, my brother-in-law was married at St. Lawrence. My wife's family is Catholic, so I've been there many times. As an employee of St. Lawrence, she was 5 months pregnant and told her principal that she needed to start the process of planning for maternity leave. 3 days after she informed the principal she was pregnant, she was fired. Straight up fired. The reason that was given was that she was fired for being unmarried and pregnant.
What?
Now, federal law. This is absolutely, her name was, I think, Krista Diaz was her name. And she was fired, yeah. And the reason was given that she was unmarried and pregnant. Now, federal laws prohibit anyone being fired because they're pregnant. So, the next step from the Archdiocese of Cincinnati was that she was fired for having premarital sex, which is against the morality clause in her teacher contract.
What?
And they knew she had premarital sex because she was pregnant. So the pregnancy was proof of her infraction.
Well, Virgin Mary got pregnant without having sex.
I think that was the first story to go wrong. she came home to her husband. She was like, "I'm pregnant," and he's like, "Don't tell me who it was. We're just gonna say that it was God."
Okay, actually, Robert has a follow-up question about his question. Okay,
cool.
So would you consider introducing Ohio state legislation that requires ministers to add back their tax-free housing purposes to the Ohio state income tax? So, like, would you consider?
Would you be active?
Yeah, would you be proactive in getting that issue fixed, to closing those loopholes? Are you planning to instill legislation to do that?
Sure. Well, I look at that as a two-part question. Number one, yes, absolutely. I would be on board working with fellow legislators to promote revising the tax code to get rid of these loopholes. Without question. And that's an easy argument to make because municipalities across the state are absolutely struggling for revenue. Closing these loopholes seems like a pretty easy way to ensure organizations are paying their fair share while also providing basic city services. So that one, absolutely.
Wait, I want to interrupt really fast. I don't know if you guys heard, but IRS is investigating all those televangelists now, and they're going to start making changes to make sure that they can't. But yeah, I don't know if you guys had heard about that, so I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, that's the power of John Oliver.
Yeah, really though. It was perfect. Everybody needs to watch that segment because it is literally the best segment I've seen on that show. That was just on point. That was so perfect. So go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you think, though, that you will run into opposition from conservative legislators that want the ministers to continue having these benefits because the ministers basically act as endorsers for their campaigns? They're not supposed to do that. They're not supposed to endorse candidates, but we all know that ministers do.
In churches especially, yeah.
So
once that door closes, yeah.
Do you think that that could be a reason that because you said that it's like it should be super easy because
Right.
everybody's hurting for money and we're always trying to figure out how to alter the budget to cover everything. So it should be a total no-brainer to make them pay taxes on their housing, or and things like that. That to make them not be getting tax-free stuff that everybody else has to pay. Like if you are the head of like any normal nonprofit, you're still going to pay like property taxes on your personal house, or
Right.
know what I mean? If it's a transaction outside of your nonprofit, if it's a personal transaction, you're going to pay taxes on that. But ministers specifically are not having to pay taxes on
It's
their
crazy.
personal properties and on their personal sales of homes. And so that's a very specific thing that needs to be fixed because it's not even nonprofit related. It's their own personal business, and no other nonprofit gets that benefit.
That luxury. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, it should be easy. But the issue, and I know a dead horse when I beat one, but it's these gerrymandered districts. Because we're talking about trying to build a consensus. In Ohio, where I live, the districts are so gerrymandered that no matter what happens in the November 2016 general election, Republicans will control both chambers of the legislature in Ohio. That will happen. There is virtually no way Democrats can take control here. So the only way for a candidate to be effective in office is to compromise, is to be able to reach across the aisle to the heavily dominated Republican-controlled House, General Assembly, and Senate and compromise. Mm-hmm. Now, I would love to be able to close loopholes left and right, but unfortunately, it requires the Republicans to be on board with that.
Yeah.
I don't know. To the I don't know, caller, the writer's question. Yeah, I would love to do it, but unfortunately, it'll take moving a mountain to be able to get Republicans to be on board with this because of the very reason you mentioned. They a fear of losing support, of losing votes. That fear drives far more decision making in politics than it should.
What is the atmosphere in your current race right now? Like the other people's beliefs. You were telling me earlier that one guy was using Christianity even though he was Jewish. He was. Go ahead and go over that again because that was awesome.
Sure. Well, yeah. I mean, it really boils down to how are you getting your name out there, and that's how it is probably for politics just about everywhere. Is name recognition is key, and so incumbents have that built-in ability to have their name in the paper more often. There we go. More average voters are familiar with that name. I was a candidate for Cincinnati City Council in 2009 and 2011, where I was an endorsed Democrat. I was endorsed by the AFL-CIO, Equality Cincinnati, the Sierra Club. The local newspapers endorsed me as a first-time candidate. So I thought that I had a lot of name recognition, but I still ended up 5,000 votes short. So what that told me was your name, having it out there, people seeing it, and in some way, shape, or form, remembering it. So yeah, there was a candidate who was on Cincinnati City Council who had a T in his last name, who isn't Christian, but made that T look an awful lot like a crucifix. And as such, was sending a subliminal message to voters that, hey, I'm a good guy, look at me. When
I have the sign of
probably
Christ.
A perfectly fine guy. But yeah, the power of Christ compels you to vote me. And it is what it is. He won re-election, and that was that. But for my race specifically, this is a smaller race. There's a smaller segment of the population that I would be representing. So again, it'll boil down to name recognition. It'll boil down to meeting those voters and getting my message. And I think this is what makes being a secular politician so important. That as a secular legislator, inherently, I think I can be more inclusive.
Yeah,
I can be
absolutely.
more accepting. I don't have these preconceived notions that affect my decision-making process. I'm truly interested in using facts and in analyzing those facts to craft policy. That's the way it should be done.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, it's not the way that it is done.
Yeah, not
But
what
hopefully,
benefits
when
your
elected,
friends.
well, exactly. My friends or my voting base, and that really, unfortunately, drives a lot of politics. But I'm far more interested in as a secular candidate. I'm not going to be the Catholic representative from the 31st district or the Methodist representative. I'm going to be the representative.
You're going to be the
And to
representative
me,
for all of
being a
them, even though, because you're secular, you're atheist, so you don't have an attachment to either one. You're able to say, hey, all of you guys have equal voice with me, and when you all speak to me, you all are represented perfectly. That's a beautiful thing. That's how this country was freaking built. But these people just say that it wasn't that way and make it all Christian and stuff, and it's just like, what are you doing? It's not under God. It's not a nation under God. It's really not. It never has
Okay,
been.
we do have, fits in with this, we did have somebody ask about, Donald Trump was asked about the atheist vote, and he was, kind of poo-pooed it. What do you think of the atheist vote? Do you think that the atheist vote is important?
Absolutely. Donald Trump said something to the effect of, atheist voters might not like him very much. And after that answer, he's probably right.
Yeah.
Atheist voters won't like him very much. He blew us off. To answer that question directly, as a candidate for public office, number one, I am interested in every vote that I can get. In no way, shape, or form am I going to ignore a voting segment of the population. A, because I need their vote, and B, more importantly, they deserve to be heard. They deserve a representative who will stand up and speak for them. And quintessentially, at the end of the day, we're talking about individuals who all want the same thing. They want opportunity.
Exactly.
An opportunity to have quality education. They want an opportunity to have a good-paying job. These are things that we can fight for and have no bearing whatsoever on religion. That should be the role of legislators.
And then
well, go ahead.
Kind of along the same lines of that, somebody just asked in chat, who are you hoping for the presidential election?
Well, the person I was hoping for isn't running. Elizabeth Warren would make a tremendous president, and at
awesome.
a minimum, she'll make a tremendous vice president.
Can you guys hear
I can
me?
hear you.
There we go. There we go. All right. Sorry about that, everyone. Okay, so back to... I heard a Bernie Sanders in there.
You did.
Good.
Bernie's been fighting a good fight for a long time. I hope that Bernie can, if he doesn't win the nomination, can at least pull Hillary farther to the left, where her base is, and be a progressive candidate.
She just she just went public and said that Henry Kissinger was her best friend or something like that. And I saw an article saying Kissinger was the same guy who destroyed the Democratic Party about 30 years ago. And I was just like, that's cool. That shows kind of where she views the world. But Sanders, he's just such a down-to-earth guy. I don't know. He's really got it. He's got the integrity. There's a lady that was explaining the whole gerrymandering thing that you were talking about earlier. That she lives in the building I work in. I'm a doorman, and she was telling me that he is unelectable and all these things. I mean, how do you feel about that? Because I'm sure you hear it all the time also that he's completely unelectable, he doesn't have enough pizzazz, and he doesn't have enough speech. He won't be able to go international and talk to other delegates and negotiate and things like that. How do you feel about international matters? What are your personal views on how we can improve, basically, through our candidacy, especially with Sanders?
Well, Bill Clinton was such a successful president because the motto within his White House was, "It's the economy, stupid." And the focus had to be on domestic issues, focused on the economy.
Exactly.
Someone like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren can do that. You talk about being able to negotiate abroad. You know, I would argue in a large part the Secretary of State, whether it's a John Kerry or Richard Nixon had Henry Kissinger, can be able to help do that, to be able to negotiate with foreign heads of state and have those consensus-building conversations to move that dial. But if the focus is here at home, if the focus is improving the quality of life for Americans across the board, that person will be a successful president.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that alone will improve our
country
image internationally. Because right now we are viewed pretty poorly around the world because with, social media and the internet and everything, everybody around the world gets to hear how miserable most of us are the past decade or so. And so they're like, man, America awesome.
You broke up there,
Because,
Koni.
saw things we were able to see from the outside. Back then, it was like,
I don't know what's going on here.
we were
It's
meant that
breaking
we
up there.
believed that we were awesome. And it's this window to the inside. I don't know either, Preston. We're fine over here, so.
It's weird.
It's all you, man.
It all
I
goes
don't
through
know.
mine too.
But yeah,
I don't
so
know.
now, I know, that sucks. So, but I'm just going to try to keep going and hopefully it'll work itself out. But now, like with Facebook and things, people get to see what we post about, our daily, struggles, and like we'll complain about how little money we make at our job or whatever, and they're like, dude, I do the same thing you do and I'm fine, so what's the problem here? And it's kind of opened up this
It's a new conversation.
international- Yeah, it's totally opened a can of worms internationally because everybody knows what's going on everywhere now.
Everything goes viral, and we can all discuss things from an international
Yep.
perspective. We're able to see Iran's view on Iran instead of just seeing
Yeah.
an American's view on Iran. Because,
Yeah.
like I read the New York Post and stuff and the Daily News, and I have to read both because I work as a doorman. I can only read the newspaper. So I read about how the Post is saying all these horrible things about Iran and stuff like that, and it's like you're completely ignoring the actual citizens of Iran that want freedom. They want the ability to do better things with their economy and stuff like that. You're just ignoring this whole entire base. That whole Iran deal is just a bunch of propaganda. It's ridiculous. There's so much propaganda around that.
Propaganda around everything. But
Well, I agree completely that.
sorry.
No, well, I agree completely that the United States has a fair amount of image rebuilding to do.
Yeah.
With that said, I'll still argue that we are the country that's the city on the hill. We are when the embodiment of the democratic process, democratic freedom. Is it a perfect system? No, absolutely not.
Definitely.
I think Winston Churchill said that democracy is the worst system of government except every other system of government. And there's truth to that. But we do have an image problem, essentially. George Bush II had a the failed invasion of Saigon, then the illegal invasion, drone strike, Guantanamo Bay, the list goes on and on. Those instances, I think, have a reputation worldwide more than out. But the conversation is certainly on domestic issues, specifically on police and community relations. We saw happen in Ferguson. Seen instances of police brutality captured on in those videos go viral. That's what you were talking about. That information to be quickly here in Cincinnati had a case where a white police officer about a month ago shot and killed an unarmed black man in his car who literally had his hands up.
Yeah.
if it wasn't for the body camera on that police officer, it would have been a police officer's word versus the dead African American guy's word. And 9 times out of 10, the police officer is going to get off. He's going to get away with it. Those body cameras level the playing field. And that's something that I talk about pretty often when I'm knocking on doors, is finding funds in the state budget to allow municipalities to be able to buy those body cameras so that we have the other side of the story.
Exactly.
If we do that, that might help improve those community, issues that seem to be hot points for anger and unrest, because the African American community rightly feels that this is a problem.
It is.
The argument that Black Lives Matter is relevant. And I had this conversation just the other day. Someone was arguing, well, all lives matter. Ugh. And I was yes, they do. But that's not the point.
Exactly.
And I made an analogy of Christmas morning. And I said, let's imagine that there are 3 kids who wake up on Christmas morning and they go downstairs to the tree, and 2 of them have presents, but 1 doesn't. The one kid without a present will say, hey, Christmas matters to me. And the father will look at him and say, well, Christmas matters to everyone. Yeah, but that doesn't mean it's fair. He wasn't arguing that Christmas isn't fair for everyone. And that's the same argument here. The Black Lives Matter movement isn't arguing that Black lives matter more than any other life. They're arguing that it matters, and that they should have the equal rights and respect under the law that they see other ethnic groups have.
The best analogy that I found was rainforest. They said that when you say save the rainforest, you're not saying fuck every other environment.
And they're obviously being treated as if they don't matter. And they have
systemically too.
Systematically.
Yeah, systematically.
All throughout history, they have been treated
pretty bad.
A plethora of evidence that government and educational institutions and employers don't value their lives as much as they value the lives of others.
And it's crazy. The Irish went through a lot also, but at the point to where they didn't have those issues so much anymore, the African American community still continued with those issues. And it's not even just the African Americans. It's colored. I mean, my dad is dark skinned, but he's fully Puerto Rican. He is considered black. If he walks out, a cop sees him, they're gonna say, hey, it's a black guy. So I mean, it's like a lot of people say, when they say Black Lives Matter, it's just African American. It's colored. It's any colored individual, because that skin color is what the thing is. That's what's making the issues. It's crazy. Really makes no sense.
Let me relay a quick story here, if you don't mind. Yeah. Maybe 3-4 months ago, my family's from Appalachia, Kentucky. So we drove down to visit some family. On the way back, my dad was driving my car, and we got pulled over. He was speeding. The officer walked up to the car, and I have my concealed weapon permit. So I'm allowed to carry a weapon with me at all times. And if I am carrying a weapon and I'm with a police officer, I'm required by law to inform the police officer that I have a firearm on me, that I have my weapon on me.
Absolutely.
So the officer came up to the car, and the very first thing out of my mouth was, "Officer, I have my concealed carry permit, and I do have my weapon on me." And the officer, without missing a beat, said, "Well, just don't shoot me." And then we both laughed, and I said, "Well, okay, absolutely." And then, and that was it. And then on the way home, as we continued to drive, the thought kept coming back to my mind: how would that interaction have been different had it been an African American saying that to the white police officer?
It wouldn't have been a joke.
Right. Yeah. It wouldn't have been such a joke, I assume.
It would not have gone down well at all.
Right. You can't say that all cops would have had that perspective, but you can say that it's more likely that if he had pulled over somebody of color, it was more likely he would have been like, hey, All right. Well,
Yeah,
not
defensive or,
defensive in some way, or definitely not joking about it.
on guard, But because also this goes to like you have all of those people having those or just straight up carrying guns protests where it's like a bunch of
The
white
assault
dudes
rifles and stuff.
walking around parking lots like loaded up with weaponry.
Yeah, one guy
And
shot into the ground by accident. Got kicked out.
Yeah, and it's like that would be such like they would not be allowed to do that if it was a group of black guys. And you just know that that's not how it would happen. Like they would immediately be viewed as a threat. It would not be, oh, they're exercising their constitutional rights to carry those guns. It would be there's 50 dudes in a parking lot with assault rifles, and
there was a group
somebody better do something about that, and society as a whole, like if something did go down, society as a whole would be like, well, somebody should have known because there was a big group of black guys with guns. But with the white guys, it's like if something goes down, like somebody accidentally gets shot.
Oh, that guy is an idiot.
Oh, well, it was just that one guy that was dumb, and it ain't all of us that are stupid like that, and that's everybody's right to have those guns. And so it's like
everybody except for black people.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like people won't just straight up won't acknowledge that difference of perspective, and it's like they have that difference of perspective because you hear them say stupid shit like that all the time.
Well, let's lead that
but
into the next topic.
But they won't acknowledge
it. What about education? We were talking about that earlier also before the show. How do you feel about education? What do you feel you can do to make a difference to improve education in the district that you're running for?
Sure. Yeah, education is a topic that I talk about fairly often. Personally, I am married and I have a 3-year-old little boy with
cute
a
kid too.
Little girl. With a little girl due in January. So
awesome.
Education is something that is critical. We know that little kids between the ages of 0 and 5 are sponges, and they're soaking up the world around them.
Yep.
That is the opportunity to get these kids on the right track so that they find success and stay with success. And to give this a context for social issues, there are counties in the country who use a formula to determine how many jail beds they're going to need in 15 or 20 years. So when they're planning for this, they specifically look at 3rd grade reading levels because they know if this many kids can't read, we're going to need this many jail beds.
What the
years.
Fuck?
There's a direct correlation.
That's fucking crazy.
Yeah. So it seems to me we all win if we focus here on getting kids the education they need instead of reacting by building more jail beds down the road. That's where we have to focus.
Exactly.
And so one of the things that I want to implement is a statewide standard quality of care for Ohio daycare providers. So in the state of Ohio, there are no regulations requiring certain activities to take place during the day at a daycare center. So unfortunately, far too often, we have kids who are plopped in front of a TV all day, never engaged. No one reads with them. No one stimulates their desire to learn. Mm-hmm. And that's a problem.
That is.
Quality daycare is not a right that's reserved for only those people who can afford it.
Right.
Mm-hmm. It should be available to everyone, regardless of background or income level.
And when you're talking about daycare, you're talking about before kindergarten, before pre-K. Absolutely, yeah.
It's getting people on the right track. We're stuck in a cycle of individuals who aren't getting a good education, dropping out of school, oftentimes finding themselves on the street, then incarcerated, out of jail, still no discernible job skill set, back in jail. There's a cycle here. The way to break that cycle is education. It means starting early, getting kids on the right track so that they want to learn, they want to succeed. When that happens, we're having individuals on the path towards self-sufficiency. And when that happens, everybody wins.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
How do you feel about creation education and happening in religious schools? Do you feel like that should be ended, like literally, like through legislation, just like banned through law, or do you feel like that's something that could be allowed? I don't think it should be allowed, honestly.
No, creationism is a fairly big issue here in Cincinnati. I
Yes.
can't drive any more than 5 miles on 71 or I-75 and not see a billboard of a man and a dinosaur promoting the Creation Museum, which is just down the road in Kentucky.
I didn't I didn't realize the proximity there. That's
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah, I mean, yeah, they're right here. In fact, there's a group that I'm proud to be involved with, the Tri-State Free Thinkers.
Nice.
And that group essentially adopted the highway right in front of the Creation Museum so that they can go out there and pick up trash and have their name on the interstate.
Nice.
In a small way, protest, this museum. But yeah, I mean, it's right down the road from Cincinnati. And creationism is certainly a topic that comes up. But from my perspective, the role of education is to educate. It's
On
for
facts.
for knowledge. Exactly. It's not for fanciful stories that are from the Bronze Age. We've progressed past that.
Social
and I
evolution.
hope, I wish that our education system was on par for that. And by and large, it is. But there's always going to be a push by some segment of the population that creationism deserves equal footing with evolution. That's just not the case.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So, as a public policy legislator, one of the things that I want to do is help ensure there is that separation between church and state, between what we're teaching our children. Because if we put them on the wrong path, then again, we're perpetuating this cycle. This time, a cycle of belief that the Bible is word for word true, and if you don't believe in it, then you're wrong. And
because the Bible said so. Because the Bible said so.
Right. Exactly.
I have a book.
I have a book.
Oh well, then I defer to you.
Well, if you have Harry Potter, I must believe. And now, how do you feel about healthcare, though? We haven't touched that at all, really.
Sure. Yeah, healthcare is something that I'm particularly passionate about because that's what I do for a living. So I own a dental practice management company. So I'm not a dentist, but I essentially assist doctors in providing dental care. I own the building. I hire the support staff. We do the insurance, processing, collection, everything essentially freeing up the doctor to do what they enjoy, practicing dentistry.
Cool.
So the number one reason individuals are in the emergency room is oral issues. It's oral care. They have a toothache. A, that's preventive. B, going to the emergency room for a toothache is the most ineffective healthcare measure that we have out there.
Yeah.
Expanding healthcare in Ohio is one of the top priorities for me. Medicaid expansion specifically. It's the idea of giving access to quality care for low-income individuals. Our office sees 93% Medicaid or state insurance. So we serve an underserved population here in Cincinnati. And, to be perfectly honest, our wait list is too long. And it's too long because we don't have enough providers in Ohio who want to accept Medicaid.
Yeah.
So Medicaid reform and expansion will be on the top of my list. Secondly, I'm proud that we partner with an organization called Caracol. And Caracol is a nonprofit specifically for HIV-positive AIDS individuals here in Cincinnati who need health care.
Wow.
And again, we're talking about an underserved population. There aren't enough doctors who accept Caracol because they don't want to treat HIV-positive patients. A, that's morally wrong. B, our perspective is to treat every patient in the chair as though they have HIV/AIDS.
Yeah.
The precautions that are in place are there for a reason. We sterilize instruments for a reason. We wear gloves and masks for a reason because we don't know whether it's AIDS, whether it's MRSA, whether it's herpes, hepatitis. It could be anything.
Yeah.
Treat everybody exactly the same,
Could be
and we're
Ebola.
giving quality. Ebola, it could be.
Yeah, we have
Obama.
we have an inner. One of the people watching wants to know if you'll include mental health, improving mental health care.
That's a good question.
Absolutely. And I want to partner mental health with addressing the issue of homelessness in Cincinnati. There's a high percentage of individuals who are experiencing homeless who also have mental health issues. I think addressing one will certainly help address the other. My background is in human services. Before I went into business for myself, I worked for the American Red Cross and the United Way. So I've seen firsthand the role that human services play in society. It's the idea of providing a safety net of essential services, a standard quality of care. And when we do that, we're trying to make sure that people aren't falling through the cracks. And when that happens, nobody wins. So absolutely, mental health care will be on the top of that list of providing services that people need to raise the standard of living for everyone.
That's awesome.
Definitely. I have a quick story I'm going to tell because it ties in with what you were saying about oral health leading to other problems. So my dad had a major stroke when he was 37 years old. And it resulted in him being in the hospital for over 4 months and needing experimental heart surgery. And the infection that eventually made its way to his heart started in his mouth.
Wow.
And so it was because he raised me. I was raised by my dad. So he was a single father. And so he did not have health care. And he could not go to the dentist, and he could not get these problems taken care of. And now he has been on disability, Social Security disability, since he was 37 years old, and he is now 52 years old. So think of the impact that would have had, because he was a carpet installer, a awesome carpet installer, but he can't do that anymore because of the stroke. And it's like, if he had just had access to adequate health care, he would still be in the profession that he enjoyed and was good at, and still contributing to society in a much better way than he is now, because now he's always just depressed because he wants to be able to do things. So that has also affected his mental health, which he doesn't get a whole lot of mental health care from, Medicare. Right. And so, it all ties together that if we had better services, none of it ever would have happened. And so it just tied in with what you were saying. So I figured I'd throw it out there.
One thing I want to go over, I know we're going to go a little bit over an hour here, but how did you find your way to atheism? Because you mentioned earlier that you were very much a heavy believer, so let's go over your journey, basically. I know we're going to go over a bit over an hour, but that's all right.
Sure, yeah. I truly believe that the 14, 15, 16-year-old version of me wouldn't recognize the man that I became. And that 14, 15, 16-year-old version of me would spend every waking moment trying to convert me back. Because that's what I did. That's who I was. I grew up in a household that wasn't religious, but certainly we're probably the Creaster people. We were there for Christmas and Easter, and that was pretty much it when I was little. But as I grew up, I found, acceptance probably is the right word, in the church. I was involved in the drama department, so we put on little skits here and there. Vacation Bible School was a big part of it.
Oh, yeah.
And,
me too.
The older people in the church were very, supportive of me.
I think you just cut off there.
Yeah. Well?
Hello?
We might be ending the show because of technical difficulties.
Can
we hear him?
No. He's just like...
Oh, yeah, we dropped out. Okay, well, like usual, how we end everything. each week. We remind you that if you go to our website, thatatheistshow.com, over on the right sidebar, there is a donation button that helps us continue doing the show. And we also have stickers for sale. So if you want, they are pre-order because we need to earn the money to be able to actually put in the order. So we're up to $20 right now. We need $85. Awesome. We need $85 though. So we're $65 away from being able to order some promotional materials. So if you are able to do that, go on over there. That would really help us so much. And if you're watching for the first time, subscribe.
Make sure to check out our Twitter, Instagram, Tumblr, That Atheist Show, everywhere you go. I might start up a Snapchat soon once we get enough followers. But oh man, that sucks. Sorry about all the technical difficulties. Got to figure out what happened, but I'll figure it out. I do tech support, so it works.
All right, yeah. So thank you for watching, everybody, and we will see you here same time next week, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Have a good night.
Bye.